The crash landing. The ship rattled violently as it broke through the atmosphere of the unknown planet. Alarms blared throughout the cockpit, and the crew scrambled to secure themselves. Commander Harris gripped the edge of his seat, barking orders over the noise. "Brace for impact," he shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos. The planet's gravity pulled them down faster than expected, and the ship spiraled uncontrollably. Outside the window, the once calm expanse of stars had been replaced by swirling clouds and jagged mountain peaks. The crew was a mix of humans and aliens, each with their own set of skills. But right now, they were all just trying to survive. With a deafening crash, the ship slammed into the rocky surface, skidding across the ground before finally coming to a halt. Inside, silence fell, broken only by the sound of debris settling. Harris unclipped his harness, his muscles sore from the impact. "Is everyone all right?" There was a groan from the corner as Lieutenant Zira, one of the alien crew members, slowly stood up, her forearms stretched awkwardly as she tried to assess the damage. "I don't know if I'm all right, but I'm alive." The rest of the crew began to check in, and soon it became clear, while there were some minor injuries, everyone had survived the crash. But as the shock wore off, a new reality set in. "We've landed on a death world," Harris said grimly, looking at the readings on his handheld device. "This planet is marked as a Class 5 death world." Zira's eyes widened in fear. "A death world? But those places are uninhabitable." "Not uninhabitable," Harris corrected, "just extremely hostile." The crew exited the wreckage cautiously, stepping onto the rocky terrain. The sky was an unsettling shade of purple, and the air, though breathable, was thick with humidity. Strange, thorn-covered plants grew in patches, while jagged cliffs loomed in the distance. It was a harsh and unforgiving landscape. As they surveyed their surroundings, Captain Threx, another alien member of the crew, activated his scanner. "The planet's wildlife is highly aggressive. We need to find shelter immediately." "Shelter?" Zira scoffed, still shaken from the crash. "There's nothing here but rock and death. How are we supposed to survive?" Harris turned to her, his face calm but firm. "We've been through worse. Earth isn't much easier to live on. You know, we'll figure it out." Zira stared at him, still unable to understand how humans could remain so composed in the face of danger. Deathworlders, humans specifically, had a reputation across the galaxy for thriving in places where most species wouldn't dare set foot. She had always thought the stories were exaggerated, but now, seeing Harris's calm determination, she wasn't so sure. The humans quickly set to work, gathering whatever supplies had survived the crash. Commander Harris led them with precision, dividing the tasks and keeping morale high. They had survived the crash, but now came the real challenge, surviving the planet. As they worked, Lieutenant Zira noticed something unsettling. The strange, thorny plants that dotted the landscape seemed to move ever so slightly, as if responding to the crew's presence. She wasn't sure if it was the wind or something more sinister. "Harris," she called out, "those plants, they're not normal." Harris glanced over and narrowed his eyes. "Stay away from them. Deathworld plants can be as dangerous as the animals." Just as he finished speaking, one of the crew members, a human named Roberts, reached down to examine one of the plants. The moment his hand got too close, the plant's thorns extended with lightning speed, nearly impaling him. "Whoa!" Roberts jumped back, his heart racing. "That thing almost got me. Stay alert, everyone," Harris ordered, his voice steady but serious. "Everything on this planet is a threat until proven otherwise." The crew moved quickly, building a temporary shelter from the remains of the ship. The alien members of the team, unfamiliar with such hostile conditions, found themselves relying heavily on the humans. Despite their differences, they worked together, understanding that their survival depended on it. As night began to fall, the temperature dropped sharply, and the once purple sky turned a deep black. The planet's twin moons rose, casting eerie shadows over the landscape. The crew gathered inside their makeshift shelter, the weight of the day's events settling in. Captain Threx, sitting near the fire, finally spoke up. "How can you humans stay so calm? We're on a death world, and yet you act like it's just another day." Harris chuckled softly. "It's not about being calm. It's about knowing how to adapt. Earth might not be as deadly as this place, but it's taught us how to handle the unknown." Threx nodded slowly, his respect for the humans growing. "I hope you're right, Commander, because if we don't find a way off this planet soon, I fear we won't last long." Harris stared out into the darkness, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We'll make it, but this death world isn't going to make it easy." The struggle for survival. The crash left the survivors scattered across the hostile terrain, and as they regained their senses, it became clear that they were stranded on a death world, a planet where everything from the environment to the wildlife posed a constant threat to their survival. The crew of mixed species had never encountered such a world before. Towering trees with thick, twisted vines loomed overhead, casting dark shadows across the dense forest floor. Strange sounds echoed around them. Predators, no doubt, stalking their new prey. The air was thick with humidity, and the unfamiliar atmosphere made it difficult for them to breathe properly. Captain Jin, the leader of the crew, quickly took stock of the situation. They had to gather the survivors, but with the planet's hostile nature, they couldn't stay exposed for long. The wreckage of their ship provided little shelter, and it was clear that this was not the time for panic. A human named Sarah, one of the few Deathworlders on board, quickly stepped up. Her eyes scanned the horizon as if she were born for this type of survival. She had been through worse in the past and knew that speed and decisive action were their only chance. "Everyone, gather what you can carry. We need to move into the forest and find shelter. Fast. If we stay here, we're sitting targets," she commanded, her voice calm but firm. The others, from species not accustomed to such brutality, hesitated. How could they survive on a planet designed to kill? Yet, something about Sarah's presence and confidence reassured them. She moved quickly and efficiently, setting an example they had no choice but to follow. As the group ventured into the thick underbrush, they encountered their first test of survival. A massive predator, with sleek black fur and glowing red eyes, crept from the shadows. It snarled, baring rows of sharp teeth. Panic set in for the crew, except for Sarah, whose reflexes kicked in. "Stay low and don't move," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the creature's growl. The others followed her lead, trembling as they crouched behind trees and rocks. The creature sniffed the air, clearly sensing their presence. Sarah picked up a fallen branch and threw it to the side, distracting the predator just enough to let them slip away quietly. It was only the first of many dangers they would face, but it became clear to the crew that Sarah's experience as a Deathworlder would be their best shot at surviving this hostile world. "We're going to need to rely on each other," Sarah said once they had escaped the immediate threat. "This planet isn't like any you've known, but if we work together, we might have a chance." The group nodded, some still shaking from the encounter. There was no denying that survival here would push them to their limits, but as long as they had Sarah, the Deathworlder, they had hope. And so, their struggle for survival began, each step more perilous than the last as they ventured deeper into the unforgiving wilderness of the Deathworld. The real challenge lay ahead, and they had to trust in their new leader, a human who thrived where others would surely perish. Unexpected allies. As the crew continued deeper into the forest, their journey took an unexpected turn. The dense foliage thinned out, revealing an ancient, abandoned structure nestled within a clearing. The building was weathered by time, its walls covered in thick vines and moss, yet it looked sturdy enough to offer some protection from the planet's predators. Sarah approached cautiously, signaling for the group to stay behind. "Let me check it out first," she said, moving silently toward the entrance. The crew, already shaken by the planet's hostility, gratefully took cover among the trees. The interior of the building was dark and smelled of damp earth, but it was surprisingly well preserved. It appeared to have been built by an advanced civilization long ago, possibly by another species that had once dared to colonize this deadly world. Sarah's instincts told her that this structure could be their lifeline, a shelter where they could regroup and plan their next move. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed from deeper within the building. Sarah tensed, her hand instinctively moving to the crude weapon she had fashioned. A sharpened piece of metal scavenged from their ship. She crept forward, her senses on high alert. The sound grew louder, like heavy footsteps approaching. Before she could react, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was massive, easily twice Sarah's height, with armored skin and glowing eyes. The creature looked like something from a nightmare, a warrior born from a death world like this one. But to Sarah's surprise, it didn't attack. Instead, the creature spoke, its voice deep and rumbling like a distant storm. "You are not from this world," it said, studying Sarah with an expression that was unreadable. Sarah held her ground, unsure of how to respond. "We crashed here. We're just trying to survive." The creature nodded slowly. "Few survive here long. This world tests all who come to it." There was a pause as it studied her, recognizing something familiar in her stance, her calm in the face of danger. "You are a Deathworlder as well," it finally said. Sarah narrowed her eyes, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "This world has a way of recognizing its own. I am Farnuk, a native of this planet. Long ago, my people were forced to adapt to the harsh realities of this place. We became stronger, more resilient. But even we do not live here willingly. This world was never meant for the weak." The rest of the crew had gathered at the entrance, watching the exchange from a distance. Their fear was palpable, but Sarah raised a hand, motioning for them to stay back. "You could have attacked us," she said. "Why didn't you?" Farnuk tilted his head. "I was curious. You are different from the others who have come here. Most die quickly, but you might just survive. And survival is something we value on this world." Sarah glanced back at the crew. "We don't have a choice but to survive," she said quietly. Farnuk regarded her for a long moment before stepping aside. "This place is safe for now. You may stay here, but know this. The dangers of this world are relentless. It will test your every move, your every breath. Only the strong and the clever will make it." Sarah nodded in gratitude. "We'll take our chances." As the group cautiously entered the structure, they felt a mix of relief and unease. The Deathworlder they had encountered was unlike anything they had ever seen, an unexpected ally, perhaps, but also a reminder of the challenges that still lay ahead. Farnuk lingered near the entrance, watching them settle in. "If you wish to leave this planet, you will need more than luck. There are others here, other survivors. Some may help you, but many will not. Trust is rare on a world like this." Sarah understood the warning all too well. The galaxy had its own rules, but this death world had its own harsher laws of survival. It was clear that forming alliances, even with the planet's natives, would be key to their survival. But whether those alliances would last was another matter entirely. The group huddled together inside the ancient building, grateful for the temporary safety it offered. Yet, in the back of their minds, they knew that their real test had just begun. This planet had not shown them everything yet, and they would need every ounce of strength, cunning, and luck to make it out alive. The hidden perils. The temporary shelter they found with Farnuk's help provided a brief respite, but Sarah and the crew knew they couldn't rely on it forever. Deathworlders, after all, lived by the rules of their brutal environment. Farnuk had been a surprising ally, but Sarah wasn't naive enough to think he would risk his own survival for theirs. Days passed, and the group started to adjust to their new reality. The structure offered protection, but the looming dangers outside were never far from their minds. The plant life itself seemed to twist and shift unnaturally, and the air had a weight to it, as if the planet was alive, observing their every move. Sarah gathered the crew one morning. "We need to explore further. If we're going to survive long enough to find a way off this planet, we can't sit here waiting. This shelter won't protect us forever. Ravi, the group's tech specialist, agreed. I've been working on a makeshift scanner from the ship's debris. It's primitive, but I think it'll help us find any usable resources or even signal for help. Farnuk, who had been standing in the shadows, stepped forward. If you plan to leave this shelter, you must understand that the real dangers here are not the beasts or the environment alone. There are others like me, Deathworlders, but not all will be as welcoming as I've been. Sarah narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? Farnuk explained. This planet is a prison of sorts, where only the strongest survive. Some of us were born here, but many were sent here, castaways, exiles, criminals. They've become part of this world, and they'll see you as nothing more than prey. A chill ran down the crew's spines. The realization that they were not alone, surrounded not just by a hostile environment, but by other survivors who had adapted to it in the worst ways, was unsettling. Still, they had no choice but to move forward. Sarah led the team into the dense jungle, with Ravi's makeshift scanner in hand. Every step was measured, every sound scrutinized. Even the wind felt predatory, like it was waiting to unleash the planet's next test upon them. Suddenly, Ravi's scanner emitted a sharp beep. There's something up ahead, he said, adjusting the settings. It's faint, but I'm picking up a metallic signature. It could be wreckage from another ship, or something more useful. Sarah nodded. Let's check it out. They moved cautiously, weaving through thick, thorny vines and strange, glowing flora. The jungle seemed endless, each step feeling more treacherous than the last. Then they found it. A ship, or rather what was left of one. It was ancient, its hull half buried in the ground, with strange markings on its exterior. Whoever built this didn't survive long, Ravi muttered as he scanned the wreckage. But this tech, this isn't from any species we know. This ship must have been here for centuries. The crew began to investigate, searching for anything that might help them survive or escape. Inside the remains of the ship, they found a small stash of supplies, ration packs, medical kits, and a few tools that were still functional. More importantly, they discovered an old communications device, its screen cracked but still faintly glowing. Ravi worked on it, his fingers moving quickly. If I can get this working, we might be able to send out a distress signal. It's a long shot, but it's better than nothing. As they gathered the supplies, a loud rustling from the nearby trees caused everyone to freeze. Farnuk, who had been standing watch, drew his weapon. We're not alone, he growled. Out of the shadows emerged a group of figures, Deathworlders, but not like Farnuk. These were far more dangerous, their bodies scared and their eyes cold. They had the look of predators, survivors of countless battles on this unforgiving planet. Looks like we found ourselves some fresh prey, one of the figures sneered, his voice dripping with malice. Sarah stepped forward, her hand gripping the metal shard she carried. We're not looking for trouble. We just want to survive. The leader of the group chuckled darkly. Survival here isn't something you ask for. You take it. Farnuk moved beside Sarah, his towering form and intimidating presence. They're under my protection. The tension in the air was thick, but Sarah could see the truth in the eyes of these Deathworlders. They weren't going to back down easily. The jungle around them seemed to close in, as if the planet itself was watching, waiting for blood to be spilled. We'll take our chances, Sarah said, her voice steady but firm. The leader's grin widened. Then let's see who survives. The crew braced themselves for what was sure to be their hardest challenge yet, not just surviving the planet, but surviving those who had mastered it. And as the jungle shifted, alive with unseen dangers, Sarah knew that this was only the beginning of their fight for survival. Survival of the fittest. The air crackled with tension as the rival Deathworlders circled Sarah and her crew. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, as if the planet itself was watching to see who would emerge victorious. Sarah's heart raced, but her mind was clear. This was a fight they couldn't avoid. Farnock, standing like a mountain beside her, eyed the other Deathworlders with cold determination. "You need to be ready," he whispered to Sarah. "They won't fight fair, and they'll use the planet against us." Sarah tightened her grip on the makeshift blade she carried. Ravi, standing slightly behind, worked quickly on the damaged communicator, hoping to send a signal before things got worse. The rest of the crew stood tense, weapons drawn, though they knew they were outmatched. The leader of the rival Deathworlders, a scared and grizzled figure named Kaiser, smirked. His eyes glowed with the savage instincts of someone who had survived countless battles on this unforgiving planet. "You don't belong here," he spat, circling closer. "This world takes the weak, and you." His eyes scanned the human crew. "Air weak." Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm but defiant. "We didn't choose to come here, but we're not leaving unless it's on our terms." Kaiser's grin widened. "We'll see about that." Without warning, he lunged forward, his speed unnerving. Farnock blocked the attack, his massive form moving with surprising agility as he pushed Kaiser back. The jungle seemed to come alive around them, the plants rustling as if stirred by the violent energy in the air. The fight erupted in chaos. Kaiser's gang charged in from all sides, and the crew was forced into a brutal battle for survival. Sarah fought off one attacker, ducking under a swing and jabbing her blade into the soft part of his arm. He howled in pain, but the victory was short-lived. Another Deathworlder slammed into her, knocking her to the ground. Farnock, now locked in a fierce duel with Kaiser, fought like a true native of the Deathworld. His strength and skill were unmatched, but Kaiser fought with a desperate ferocity, like a cornered animal. The two clashed with primal force, each blow echoing through the dense jungle. As Sarah struggled to her feet, she saw Ravi in the distance, frantically working on the communicator. He had managed to power it up, but it was barely functional. "Just a little more time," he muttered to himself, trying to patch a signal together. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew fought to hold off the attackers. They were outnumbered, but their determination was unshakable. Every second felt like a lifetime as they battled for survival on a planet that had no mercy. Just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, a deafening roar echoed through the trees. The ground trembled, and the jungle parted to reveal a massive creature, a beast native to this deadly world. It was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen, a towering predator with armored scales and eyes that glowed with an eerie intelligence. The creature lunged at the rival Deathworlders, forcing them to scatter. Kaiser barely dodged the beast's massive jaws as it snapped at him, its roar shaking the very air. "You brought this on yourselves," he shouted, but his voice was tinged with fear. Farnock seized the opportunity, landing a powerful blow to Kaiser's side. The rival Deathworlder staggered, his grin fading as he realized the tables had turned. The crew, taking advantage of the chaos, regrouped. Sarah pulled Ravi to his feet. "Is it working?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the battle still raging around them. Ravi nodded, breathless. "I sent a signal. It's weak, but it's out there. Now we just have to survive long enough for someone to find us." The massive predator continued its assault, tearing through the jungle and scattering the rival Deathworlders. Kaiser, wounded and furious, snarled one last threat before retreating into the jungle with his gang, disappearing into the shadows. As the dust settled, Farnock stood victorious, his chest heaving from the exertion. "You fought well," he said, his voice rough but approving. "But this world isn't done testing you yet." Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow and looked around at her crew. They were battered, but alive. "We made it through this," she said, her voice steady. "But he's right. We're not safe yet." The jungle around them was eerily silent now, as if the planet was watching, waiting for the next challenge. But for the first time since they crash-landed, Sarah felt a spark of hope. The signal was out there, and they had survived another test. Now, it was a race against time, to escape the planet before it claimed them as its next victims. The signal. The thick canopy above cast the jungle in perpetual twilight as Sarah and her crew huddled around Ravi's fragile communicator. The signal had been sent, but now they faced the most difficult part: waiting. Each passing moment felt like a silent challenge from the planet itself, daring them to survive just a little longer. "Any word yet?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice calm, though tension gnawed at her insides. She knew better than to expect an immediate rescue, but hope flickered faintly nonetheless. Ravi shook his head, his fingers tapping impatiently on the damaged device. "Nothing so far. The signal is weak, but it's out there. We just have to hope someone's listening." Farnuk, standing watch a few feet away, grunted in agreement. "If your people are anything like you, they'll come," he said. "Though I wouldn't rely on hope alone. This place won't stay quiet for long." The jungle had been uncharacteristically still since the last encounter with Kaiser and his gang, but that only made everyone more nervous. The Deathworld was never truly at peace. Its silence was often more dangerous than the chaos, a warning that something was coming. "We need to be ready for anything," Sarah said, standing up and motioning to the rest of the crew. "Keep your weapons close. If Kaiser comes back, or if the planet decides to throw something worse at us, we can't be caught off guard." As the crew spread out, keeping a wary eye on the dense jungle, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the countless stories she had heard of this world. Stories of ruthless predators, dangerous Deathworlders, and an unforgiving environment. Now she was living in one of those stories, trapped on this hostile planet with a crew barely holding it together. Hours passed, each one dragging longer than the last. The jungle seemed to close in around them, its oppressive atmosphere weighing heavily on everyone. Sarah paced, her nerves on edge. The planet felt alive, as if it was testing them, waiting for them to falter. Suddenly, Ravi's communicator crackled to life with a faint, distorted signal. The crew froze, every eye turning toward Ravi as he scrambled to adjust the controls. "Wait, there's something," he muttered, his hands shaking with excitement. Sarah rushed to his side. "Is it a rescue ship?" Ravi squinted at the device. "It's hard to tell. The signal is weak, but it's human. They're trying to reach us, but the interference from the planet is making it hard to get a clear message." "Try boosting the signal," Sarah said, her heart racing. "We need to let them know we're here." Ravi nodded, quickly adjusting the settings. The communicator sputtered and whined, but after a moment, the garbled voice on the other end grew clearer. "Crew of the stranded vessel, we received your signal. Prepare for extraction." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "They found us," she whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. Ravi grinned. "We're getting off this rock." But before they could celebrate, the jungle came alive with movement. The ground vibrated beneath their feet as distant roars echoed through the trees. The wildlife, which had been eerily quiet for hours, now burst into a frenzy of noise. Farnuk tensed, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the tree line. Something's coming, and it's big. The crew quickly gathered their weapons, forming a defensive circle around the communicator. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Rescue was on the way, but they had to survive long enough to be picked up. "Hold the line," she shouted, her voice cutting through the rising chaos. "We can't let them take us down now." The first creature burst from the trees, a massive predator, its scaled hide glistening in the faint light. It let out a bone-rattling roar as it charged toward them, but Farnuk was ready. He met the beast head-on, his blade flashing as he drove it back with a powerful strike. The jungle exploded into violence as more creatures emerged from the shadows, drawn by the signal or the noise of the humans. It didn't matter now. The planet had sent its final challenge, and the crew had no choice but to fight for their lives. Sarah ducked under a swipe from one of the smaller predators, slashing at its exposed side. She moved quickly, her mind focused on survival, but the sheer number of enemies was overwhelming. "Ravi, keep the signal going," she shouted, barely dodging another attack. Ravi huddled over the communicator, trying to maintain the connection while the battle raged around him. "I'm trying," he called back, his voice filled with tension. Farnak fought like a force of nature, cutting down beast after beast, but even he was beginning to show signs of fatigue. "We can't hold them off forever," he growled, his voice strained. Just when it seemed they would be overwhelmed, a powerful blast lit up the sky. A human ship descended through the atmosphere, its cannons firing on the predators below. The creatures scattered, retreating back into the jungle as the ship's thrusters roared to life. "They're here," Sarah shouted, relief flooding her as the ship's landing gear touched down. The crew wasted no time, rushing toward the open hatch as the ship lowered a ramp. As they boarded, Sarah cast one last look at the jungle, a world that had tested them in every way possible. They had survived, and now they were finally going home. As the ramp closed behind them, the jungle faded from view. The planet had been merciless, but they had beaten the odds. The escape. As the rescue ship's ramp sealed shut, a collective sigh of relief filled the cabin. Sarah leaned back against the cold metal wall, her body aching from the battle, but her mind finally at ease. They had made it. The nightmare of the death world was behind them. The ship's engines roared to life, and through the small viewport, Sarah saw the jungle shrinking as they ascended. The dense, unforgiving world that had tried to claim their lives was left behind, its towering trees and dangerous creatures becoming distant shadows. Finally, Ravi muttered, collapsing into a seat beside her. His fingers were still stained from fiddling with the communicator for hours on end. "I wasn't sure we were getting out of there." Sarah smiled faintly, exhaustion in her eyes. "You did great, Ravi. Without that signal, we'd still be fighting those monsters." Farnak, sitting across from them, grunted in agreement. "You fought well, human. I've never seen a team hold its ground like that. Not against the horrors this planet throws." The pilot of the ship glanced over his shoulder from the cockpit. "We'll be back in human-controlled space in a few hours. Get some rest. You've earned it." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to relax. The adrenaline that had kept her on edge for days was fading, leaving behind only fatigue. She closed her eyes and let her thoughts drift, the hum of the ship's engines lulling her into a light doze. But even in her brief rest, memories of the death world haunted her. She could still hear the predators' roars, feel the oppressive heat of the jungle, and see the desperate fight for survival. The planet had tested them in every way imaginable, but they had endured. Suddenly, a soft chime broke the silence in the cabin. The pilot's voice cut through the calm. "We're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. Looks like they want a report on what happened." Sarah opened her eyes, her mind snapping back to focus. The Galactic Council. They had been the reason her crew had ended up on that cursed planet in the first place. A simple mission of exploration had turned into a fight for survival, and now the Council wanted answers. "Put it through," Sarah said, sitting up and straightening her posture. A holographic display flickered to life in front of them, revealing the stern face of a council official. His eyes narrowed as he glanced at the disheveled crew, clearly unimpressed by their appearance. "Captain Sarah Winters," the official began, his tone sharp, "you and your crew were sent to survey the death world. We received a distress signal, but little else. Report your status." Sarah exchanged a glance with Ravi and Farnak before addressing the official. "We encountered more than we expected. The planet's wildlife was far more aggressive than our initial scan suggested. We were stranded after an attack and forced to survive for days." The official's expression didn't change, but there was a brief pause as he processed her words. "And the results of the survey. Did you complete the mission?" Sarah's jaw clenched. The Council had always been more concerned with data than the lives of the people they sent into the unknown. "No, we didn't. We were too busy staying alive." The official raised an eyebrow. "That is unfortunate. The Council will have to reevaluate future expeditions to that world." Farnock, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "If you ask me, you should leave that planet alone. It's not a place for the faint of heart, Counselor." The official glanced at Farnock, clearly unimpressed by the alien's gruff demeanor. "Your opinion is noted. Captain Winters, your crew will be debriefed upon arrival. The Council expects a full report." With that, the hologram flickered out, leaving the cabin in silence once more. Sarah let out a frustrated sigh, shaking her head. The Council was always the same, cold, calculating, and distant. They saw the galaxy through data points and reports, not through the eyes of those who experienced its dangers firsthand. Ravi leaned back in his seat, letting out a low chuckle. "You'd think after everything we went through, they'd at least say good job, or something." Sarah smiled, though there was no humor in it. "That's the Council for you. Always more interested in the mission than the people." Farnock crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. "You humans, you're strange. You fight harder than any species I've ever known, yet your leaders care little for your survival. It's no wonder the galaxy fears you." Sarah looked at him, intrigued. "Fears us?" Farnock nodded. "You've proven time and again that you can endure the worst the universe has to offer. If a human can survive a death world, there's little that can stop them." The words hung in the air, a quiet reminder of what they had just accomplished. They had survived the worst, and in doing so, they had proven something not only to themselves but to the galaxy at large. As the ship continued its journey home, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The mission had been a disaster, but they had survived. And in a galaxy full of dangers, survival was sometimes the greatest victory of all. The crew sat in comfortable silence, each of them lost in their thoughts. They had been tested by the death world, and they had come out stronger. Whatever the future held, they were ready for it. And as the stars outside the viewport shimmered in the distance, Sarah knew one thing for certain. They were leaving the death world behind, but its lessons would stay with them forever.